Welcome to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm your host, Pete Mezzetti. My guest this evening is Eric Hammerling, who's the Executive Director for the Connecticut Forest and Park Association. Eric, welcome. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing great. So glad to be with you, Pete.
You too. It's been a while, pal. What's new?
Hey, boy, where do I begin? Do you want to hear about forests, parks, trails, you name it? But we're busy at CFPA.
Before we get started, let's start with exactly what the CFPA is and what you guys do.
Sure. Yeah, the Connecticut Forest and Park Association is actually the oldest conservation organization in Connecticut. We're established in 1895, now 126 years ago. And at the time, there were no state parks and no state forests. There were no blue blazed hiking trails. But there was an organization with an idea to try to get those places established around the state. And I like to say just, you're welcome. But obviously, those great ideas have borne amazing fruit. We now have 110 state parks, 32 state forests, and almost 900 miles of blue blazed hiking trails all around the state. And those are all things that my predecessors at CFPA worked on, and we continue working on today to try to make sure there are amazing places outdoors for people to connect and protect.
Absolutely. Now, how long have you been with CFPA?
I have been the executive director since 2008. Previous to that, I was with the Farmington River Watershed Association and have been working on, in nonprofits to conserve forests, parks, trails, wildlife for my entire career. So this is a passion for me.
Nice. Now, Eric, tell us a little bit about how the pandemic has affected exactly what you guys do at CFPA.
Yeah, well, this last year, we throughout the year kept on talking about, right, when life hands you lemons, you make lemonade. We had to really be creative. And so, as an example, one thing that we do every year since 1993 is we host Connecticut Trails Day. Right. And Trails Day always happens the first weekend in June. On a typical year, there would be 200 to 250 events happening statewide. Okay. But as you remember, June last year was not a great time to be encouraging gatherings of people and all of that. Typically, 6,000 people or so will participate in Trails Day events. So we had to get creative. And what we decided to do last year was to make Trails Day a DIY, a do-it-yourself event. Sure. Where we provide lots of information on places where people could go to have a nice walk or ride or run or paddle. Right. And, with all that information, we would encourage people to get outdoors. We did lots of fun videos to kind of show if we were on an event together, what we would be doing. And we kind of put out a lot of information that way. We know a lot of people used it and enjoyed it. But this year, we are sensing that things might be a little bit different. But that's just, one example of how we needed to be nimble and creative and make things work.
Now, how do we think Trails Day is going to look this year?
I think Trails Day is going to be really exciting once again. We're going to be having in-person events. This is the first weekend in June, so the expectation is that most people would have had the opportunity to be vaccinated by that time. That said, we're still encouraging people to be wearing masks and be socially distanced at our events, and they're limited to no more than 15 people participating in any event. So, we want to do things safe. We want to be respectful. We want to get people outdoors, but we want to make sure that people not only have a great time, but aren't afraid of, the lingering things that may be with us with coronavirus. So, but we will be returning to the outdoors with people, and we're very excited about it.
Now let's talk about the trails aspect of things as far as I understand there's been a boom in trail usage over the last year. Why is that?
Yeah, well, as you know, with so many indoor options closed,
Right.
and people feeling really edgy and anxious indoors,
Right.
to have places to go outdoors has been absolutely critical for not just physical health, but mental health.
Right.
And there have been a number of different projections made on how much trail use increased this last year. But the two that I tend to hang my hat on are, what the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection, DEEP,
Mm-hmm.
said was their, increase in trail use on state lands this last year. They estimate that it increased by about 50% over the previous year.
Okay.
And there's also the Yukon has a group called the Connecticut Trails Census that actually has counters on various trails around the state to see how many people are physically on the trail. So it's very scientific. And they documented a 38% increase on their trails, the 15 trails that they monitor across the state. But that said, some of those trails increased by almost 200%. So there were just a ton of people getting outdoors. We do know that some of those studies also told us some important things to know, such as about half of the people who are getting outdoors were doing it between 1 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the weekend.
Okay.
So it's not just a lot of people were getting outdoors, but if you wanted to avoid the crowds, people started getting better and better about this. If you want to avoid crowds, don't go out during those highest volume times. Right. And it's things like that we learned from the Yukon Trail Census that I think is really useful and made it safer and safer for people to get outdoors.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, before I forget, I actually had a mutual friend of ours on with me not long ago, and that was Commissioner Dykes from the DEEP. What a wonderful person she is.
She's amazing. She's really smart. She is, I just can't even imagine all the different things that cross her desk in a typical day.
Exactly.
But, the fact that DEEP is not just, parks and forests and those things that are relatively easy to imagine, though right. Not easy to manage well. But she also has to deal with the energy policy and implementing waste strategies and making sure that we have clean air quality and dealing with all the different aspects of climate. So yeah, that's a challenging job, and Absolutely. She's doing a really nice job, as well as anyone could do. Honestly, under the circumstances, it is tough. So we're really pleased to partner with the commissioner on a number of different things, and there are just some outstanding people at DEEP that we work with all the time, right. And are really proud of that relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely. So last time you and I were together, you were still working remotely. Have your offices opened yet or no?
So we're still primarily working remotely. We have, in our headquarters in the Rockfall section of Middlefield, sure. We have an office manager, Terry, who goes into the office every day because someone needs to, be there to look after the building and take care of the mail and kind of keep things moving. But most of the rest of our staff work almost entirely remotely. But that will be changing a little bit, as things start opening up again. We have a community room that on a typical year would support meetings by about 60 different nonprofit organizations. Okay. But again, until things are safer, right. We're not going to reopen that space, but we hope to do that relatively soon. So hopefully by the end of the summer, we'll be reopening the office and reopening our community room, all subject to change. But I'm positive enough to say it on your show, Pete.
Absolutely. Now, Eric, can you tell me, is it possible for the trails to be overused?
That's a great question because yes is the short answer.
Okay.
But just to add a little bit to that, the more people who are on the trails, the more basic wear and tear there is of the footpath,
Right.
especially if people are going out during right after wet weather. You'll see some of the erosion damage that can occur. But the one thing that we've been hearing an awful lot about that really does concern us is, there has been an increase in both trash and graffiti and, other defacing of, outdoor kiosks and, information for trail users. Some of that is we totally understand that people are, pent up, don't have a lot of things to do, have extra time on their hands, and maybe that leads to a little extra mischief. But it is unfortunate that that does take away from the experience of others. So we encourage people to use their best etiquette, say trail etiquette, when they're outdoors and recreating. You always want to, if you bring something in, food or whatever, take it out with you. We appreciate if you're, out on a trail with your pets that you are cleaning up after them, but please don't leave, doggy bags full of stuff for people to discover. Take it out with you. So, all those types of things. And I think as people use trails more and get more familiar with common courtesies like that, it'll be a better experience for everyone.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, as far as Trails Day in June, is it going to be virtual this year, and do you need people to help and volunteer?
So, we are still, if people are interested in leading Trails Day events, we're still open for people to register events. So, if you're a land trust, or if you're not affiliated with an organization, but just have a place that you want to share with people.
Right.
As I mentioned, we will be limiting the number of people who can attend events to 15, but we will be going ahead with Trails Day. And we are, really thankful to have so many people who are willing to be leaders, who want to share their experience with the outdoors with others. And we find that having leaders for Trails Day events really makes a huge difference because it allows people to share their passion with a place, which is infectious. And it also allows people who might be a little bit tentative about going out and exploring a place on their own to have the comfort of going with someone who knows it really well and can, make that an easy place to get acquainted with. So we're, really hoping that there are going to be, there probably will not be 250 events this year because I know that some people are not feeling quite safe enough to lead events. But we expect to have perhaps 100 and lots of options for people to get outdoors.
Absolutely. And what I noticed, especially last summer, is the parks like Hammerling and Rocky Neck filled up a lot because of everybody, the weather being nice and everybody wanting to get outside.
Yeah, there were about, of the 110 parks, about a quarter of them it's and we kind of looked at this would close due to capacity reasons almost every weekend. And first of all, that says something really good about the state parks and in terms of how much people value them and want to be in them. But just like the stresses that we see on trails when there are more users, that puts stress on parks as well. So I would just encourage people who are going to state parks and you see someone either at the gate waving you through to say, hey, you don't have to pay because you're a Connecticut resident and you paid as part of your registration to support the passport to the parks. Come on in.
Right.
Do know that the people who are maintaining state parks are on the front lines. They are seeing a lot of different people. They are masked. They are, this last year, DEEP had to spend something like $200,000 just on PPE to keep their employees safe.
Right.
So, just know that there are a lot of heroes out there making sure that you're having a great time at the park, and that the fact that they have reduced parking and are closing a bit more is, both on one side, it's because people love parks and are getting out to them. But on the other side, DEEP is trying to make sure that people who go to parks are safe. So that's why they've imposed those limits on visitation as well.
Right. And what our viewers and listeners don't know is because where I am down on the shoreline, I'm between Hammonasset and Rocky Neck.
Yeah, and those are the two most visited of the state parks. Hammonasset, just like we saw an increase in people coming out to trails this last year. I heard through October of this past year, they did a comparison to last October and how many visitors came to Hammonasset, and they said, well, the previous year, about 2.2 million people came to Hammonasset, which is, again, more than any other state park. But this past year during this COVID year, right, about 2.7 million people came to Hammonasset over that same time frame. So that was an increase of about 20%. And that means that there is, 20% more garbage, 20% more people bumping into each other. Mm-hmm. They did find, unfortunately, they had to, call the environmental conservation police a lot more for various issues. So, there are just lots of things that come along with being popular. But I've got to say, for the most part, the parks did a really nice job holding up under a lot of public interest. And that's a wonderful thing that we all had that outlet and places to go when we needed to get outdoors and away from all the anxiety and stuff indoors.
Now, as far as the conservation police, what exactly do they do?
So there are about, I think, 40 or so environmental conservation police, and they are, cross-deputized with, state police and local police. So they could basically do any police function, but what they're typically called to do is to enforce, wildlife-related laws, like if folks might be hunting or fishing and going beyond the limits. They also get called if someone comes to a state park and is doing something that they're not supposed to be doing there, and it's right, an unsafe situation. Lots of different things, but unfortunately, you can't always control what types of behavior people are going to have. So they also get called into, just like any other officer of the law, to deal with, domestic disputes and other things like that. So they are very busy. There are not enough of them. And although, it's really important to, give them a call when there is an issue, just know that because there are so few of them, there might be a little bit of a delay.
Now we talked about the trails topics. Let's talk about the forest topics.
Sure. So, one thing that's on a lot of people's minds these days with regard to forests is another issue that is related to it, which is climate change. And, I heard one scientist say, and I thought it was kind of well put, that, one of the problems with climate change is you have all of this carbon in the atmosphere. Right. And one way to keep carbon out of the atmosphere is to hold it in trees, right? More trees and more carbon that they're holding, that's less carbon in the atmosphere to create mischief. Right. So there's been a lot of study over the last year on forests to see how they can help us in taking carbon out of the atmosphere and help us to get to a place where we're not going to have all of the issues that climate change is causing for us, right? We're seeing more intense storms. We're seeing different weather patterns. We are seeing forests themselves are having problems because of climate change, which seems kind of odd. On one hand, because of the warmer weather, and you've certainly seen our winter patterns kind of changing somewhat, and we have longer growing seasons because of climate change. So you would think that's good for forests, right? They grow for longer. Unfortunately, that also means that invasives or invasive plants that compete with forests are growing much faster. That means that deer, who under a typical winter, there might be more deer mortality, but because they're surviving the winter just fine, you have lots of young deer when new forests are trying to regrow that are munching up all those little forest seedlings. So you have less forest regeneration because of climate change. And you also have these weird things that happen, like more frost damage to tree roots, because there's something about snow that, it's not just that it's cold, but it's also really good insulation. So if you have snow over, tree roots, that actually helps to protect them against really cold weather, interestingly enough. So we have a little less snow at certain times, which means that if you have less snow and then some really cold weather, you put tree roots at greater risk of frost damage. So you have all of these different things that are kind of interplaying with each other at the same time that we're trying to have healthier, more resilient forests to do something about climate change. So there are a lot of different recommendations that have been made, and I was fortunate to work as, volunteer as the chair of the forest subgroup of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. And this last year, we put together a report talking about the state of Connecticut's forests. What are some things that can be done to make sure that forests are more healthy and resilient and are better at helping us to deal with climate change? And there are some things that we hope will be put into place this next year in the legislature and beyond that are going to help us move forward and do a better job on climate change, at least on the land side. Of course, that there's a big issue with climate when it comes to cars or power plants or other sources of energy or homes that put a lot of climate change related gases out into the atmosphere. Forests, farms, soils are and wetlands are some of the natural ways that climate change can be addressed. And there's a growing body of evidence and support between what they call natural climate solutions to try to do something about climate. So we're really actively involved with the forest side of that. And I could probably spend much more time than we have talking about these issues, but thanks for asking the question. There's a lot happening in the forest area.
Now, as far as what's going on with the legislative session as far as you guys are concerned?
Yeah, so there are always a lot of issues in every legislative session. We are always trying to protect the passport to the parks, to make sure that those funds stay intact, and that the program that we all support when we register our vehicles is doing its job to make sure that our parks are operated and maintained well with sustainable funding. We are, so far, the passport in this legislative session has remained intact. It's intact with regard to anything proposed in the governor's budget, but and I'm looking for some wood to knock on to hope that remains to be the case. There's also been a few issues related to, I'll say, more trees than forests in the legislative session. So, for example, when there's a big storm and people lose power, one of the first things you'll often hear from, the electric utilities is, well, we had some trees hit wires and cause an outage. We need to do something about that. Well, it's not as easy as that might sound.
Absolutely.
Because, a lot of these trees are, owned by private landowners. And we want to make sure that there's always a balance between If you have a tree in front of your home and you want to, make sure that it's safe for electricity, but also provides you the benefits that trees do provide, there needs to be some give and take, right? If an electric utility might find, hey, the best thing that we can do from keeping power in a certain area is to take down that tree.
Right.
Well, okay, but let's make sure that we talk it through, right? Let's make sure that I can represent what I'd like to see come from this. So there are a number of issues around trees and electric utilities, as well as trees in highway medians and along the highway that are often removed in the name of safety. Yeah. But again, boy, does it change the look of our landscape. And also, if you're thinking about climate change and wanting to keep more carbon in more trees, again, you have to be thoughtful as you're removing trees. Yes, remove trees that are hazardous, but if they are healthy trees and can remain, you should do everything you can to keep them there. So issues like that are being addressed. We're hoping that next year, one of the major recommendations in the forest subgroup report will be something that's considered by the legislature, and that is trying to move Connecticut to being a no net loss of forest state. There are 2 states on the East Coast right now that are no net loss of forest states, New Jersey and Maryland. And that's a policy that they've used to reduce their losses of forest and forest land and conversion to developed land. And those states have had very positive experiences. We, in December, did a webinar with representatives from those states to talk about kind of pros and cons and how might this work well for Connecticut. And we'll be working as part of a task force to work out all the different kind of sub details for how to make sure this is done in a way that's fair and equitable and ultimately successful. And so we're hoping that by next legislative session in 2022, that'll be something at the top of the agenda.
Eric Hammerling, would you mind sticking around for another segment?
I'd be happy to, Pete.
All right, we'll be right back.
Hi, everyone. Al Roker here. As a guy with his own catchphrase, I appreciate that Smokey's only said,
"Only you can prevent wildfires."
But I'm filling in because there's a lot more to report. Like when there are parched or windy conditions out there, you gotta be extra careful with things like burning yard waste. After all, wildfires can start anywhere, even in your neck of the woods. Go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention.
COVID-19 has changed how we spend weekends with the girls. Now it's time to take the first step that lets us get back to brunching instead of late-night munching. Before we can safely come together, we need the facts. As COVID-19 vaccines become available, you may have questions.
Should I get it? Is it safe? Should I wait?
It's okay to have questions. Now get the facts at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you.
Welcome back to this week's edition of the Pete Mezzetti Show. I'm your host, Pete Mezzetti, sitting here with Eric Hammerling, who's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Forest and Park Association. Eric, welcome back.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you, my friend. Hey, Eric, we were talking a little bit about in the first segment the passport to the parks program. Boy, that's a mouthful. I was wondering if we can maybe talk about that a little bit to open up this segment and exactly what it is and how it works.
Sure. So the Passport to the Parks went into effect starting in 2018.
Okay.
And what it basically does is it allows anyone who has a Connecticut license plate, with their car being registered in Connecticut, to get into state parks without paying at the gate. And this is a huge benefit for all of us who, if you didn't have a season's pass, which was, $100+ you would have to just on one visit to a state park at a place like, Hammonasset or Rocky Neck. For one car, it would cost you $13 to get in. As you might imagine, that was leading to a lot of people deciding, maybe I don't want to go to the state parks because either I can't afford it, or gee, that's a lot of money just to go to a state park.
Exactly.
Well, now we all contribute to state parks when we register our motor vehicles, because a vast majority, 90% of people who go to state parks do it in their cars. And
Right.
that fee that used to be paid at the gate was always called a parking fee.
Yeah.
So we all pay $5 a year per vehicle. And that fee goes to the Passport to the Parks Fund, which is for funding operations and maintenance at state parks. Altogether, it winds up raising about $20 million a year, which is not all of what it takes to maintain and operate 110 state parks, but it's a vast majority. Let's say it's 85% of what it takes. So we've almost, through just that $5 a person or per registration fee, have made our state parks almost sustainable financially. Now, that is such a big change from where we were before 2018. As you may remember, in 2016, 2017, not only were they actually losing staff and not hiring seasonals, but there were also 4 state campgrounds that were closed because they said, we just don't have the money to do it. All we have is support through the general fund, not this Passport to the Parks fund.
Right.
Without special funding, state parks were getting worse and worse managed and maintained every year. And so it was absolutely necessary and critical. And we think so far it's been really successful. And of course, now you wonder, was $5 enough? Because boy, there are a lot of people coming to state parks. There are an awful lot of things that need to be done. But we're just really amazed at what that $5 per vehicle per year fee is able to do, and we're in a much better place today than we were just a few years ago.
Absolutely. Herrick, what do you think the state of Connecticut should do to protect the forest?
And that's a really important question to ask, and I'll add a little subtlety to it, because we've worked with a lot of people who are both people who don't know much about forests and people who are also professionals who work in the forests, and to protect forests, to people who work in the forests, the question is always, protect them from what? Right? When we talk about protecting forests, it's protecting them from being converted to a non-forest use, a parking lot, a strip mall, something that's no longer providing the benefits that forests provide to society. That said, there are also things that could be done with our existing forests that can be better managed to ensure that they are healthier, more resilient to climate change, and long into the future can be sustainably managed. And so we're always trying to find that balance, but it starts with making sure that forests aren't lost to development. And we're being really thoughtful about where we want our future forests to be and how healthy we want them to be. So that's the other thing that I'll mention is it's going to also take more investment in land acquisition and providing incentives to forest landowners if we want to really protect our forests from being lost to development. And so far, unfortunately, I think there's been some really great recommendations on things that we can do, but without the resources to actually implement those recommendations, we're not going to be able to do what we all hope to. So I hope we'll get a little bit more aggressive on the budget side in really investing in, there's an open space and watershed land acquisition program that the state has. Right now, it's underfunded. There's a Recreation and Natural Heritage Trust Fund to acquire land to become state parks and forests and wildlife management agencies.
Right.
There was zero recommended in the governor's budget for that important program. And there are about 150 landowners who are saying, you know what, I would love for my property to become a state park or forest, but I can't just give it to you for free. I'd like to sell it at market value. And without any funding there to protect those areas, they may very well be lost to development. So, we have to be willing to invest, and we have to be willing to think about the future. And I think we can get there. I'm an optimist, and that's why we're going to keep on fighting for that.
Now, is there something in the legislature regarding forest right now?
Right now, the biggest piece is what I mentioned in terms of having funding for acquisition.
Okay.
We're also hoping that while I'm speaking about the state budget, I should mention we're really happy with one aspect of the state budget, which is there is funding or bond funding for the recreational trails and greenways program.
Okay.
The governor's request. And we hope that will stay in there. Right now, the trails program for the state is out of funding. They gave their last matching grant in early 2019. And we've been waiting and hoping that the governor will convene the bond commission to release those funds, to put them to work. Funds are already authorized, but they haven't yet been released. And so it's things like that where it's great concepts, great things that have been authorized to be done, but without the funding being released, we can't make progress. So those are the big things on forests and trails in the legislature. And there are, of course, always and protecting the passport to the parks is on the park front.
Now, the parks have also seen a big increase in visitation. How are they dealing with this? How are they dealing with the increase?
And I think it varies from place to place. But what they've tried to do is make sure to allocate resources where they need to be when they need them. Okay. But it's really tough when you're talking about the places that get the most visitation, and it's really tough also when you have only now, I believe it's about 80 full-time staff who are responsible for 110 state parks. Now, they are helped by almost 600 seasonal staff who from time, for about 8 to 9 months out of the year are working in parks and forests and wildlife management areas to keep things together. Right. If you can imagine how difficult it is each year to start with a new group of seasonals. Some people do stay for multiple years, but a number of new seasonals each year who have to be retrained and made ready for the season ahead. It's tough. It really is taxing on those full-time staff. It is efficient from a funding standpoint. Folks who are working seasonal jobs get paid a whole lot less than full-time staff, but it's a hard way to run a park system. And so when you have early in the season, when you have a lot of people coming into the parks, it's particularly tough to stay on top of all the things that need to be done to keep parks safe and clean and open for the public. So they're finding their stride, I think, since they've been through the passport to the parks for the last couple of years. Sure. But it's tough when every year things are a little bit different, right? Who would have foreseen COVID-19 and all the things that were thrown at us this last year, and who would have foreseen that the increase was going to be as dramatic as it's been in terms of people getting out to the park. So there's a lot to stay on top of. We know they're doing the best that they can with the resources that they have, but the resources that they have are limited. So it will always be a challenge.
Now, I've heard there's some controversy around what to do with the Seaside State Park in Waterford, excuse me. And there's a bill in the legislature to do something. What's the FPA doing about that?
There is, and yeah, thanks for mentioning that. That's a really important issue that I would imagine your listeners would be interested in.
Sure.
Now, there are so there's 110 state parks. One of the most recently designated state parks was Seaside State Park in Waterford, which up until 2014 was a sanatorium for people who had pneumonia, and that was one of the ways back in the 1920s, 30s. Where people would get better with fresh air. Isn't it amazing how far we've come? And we still know that fresh air is good for people.
Absolutely.
Well, as a state park, it's also an amazing place. It's not huge. It's only about 32 acres, but it's right on Long Island Sound with, as the name suggests, right, seaside. Yeah. It has unbelievable views. It is right now being used by fishermen and, folks who want to have that direct access to Long Island Sound. And actually, if you go back in history, when Connecticut was first trying to protect land to be state parks, the number one priority was to protect land on Long Island Sound to make sure that the public had access to the shore. So there is that at Seaside. At the same time, there are also some historic buildings at Seaside, which were mostly designed by the famous architect Cass Gilbert, who's kind of known for being the architect behind the Supreme Court building in DC or the Woolworth building in New York. So an amazing architect with a lot of history. And there are some big buildings there that have been the source of this controversy. What to do? Do we keep Seaside State Park as a passive recreation place with buildings being closed down as they have been? Or do we see the opportunity to renovate those buildings and make them something of value to the state? Or there have also been proposals in the legislature to, maybe turn that into, residential facility for individuals to have a nice place in Waterford on the shore. As you might imagine, to do that and to retain access to the shoreline and to our mind, stay a state park with its public purposes intact is a real challenge. And so it has been controversial. And we always approach these issues knowing that, people don't always have to be of like mind, but we do think it's really critically important to make sure that this kind of once in a lifetime opportunity to have shoreline access is not lost. One thing that I should mention is that when Seaside State Park was designated in 2014, it was the first shoreline park in Connecticut to be designated in the last 50 years. So this is not something that just comes along every day, and we have to be really careful and thoughtful about how we proceed there. I would suggest that doing it through legislation is not the best way to do it. I think we need to support DEEP in making sure that it remains a state park. It is managed well to its highest and best use. And I would say, support the agency that we task with doing that for all of our state parks, and don't try to have one state park go at it in a very different way, which could have some unintended, but we would say dire consequences. So it's a big issue we're watching. And I guess next time I see you, Pete, I'll be able to give you an update on how it goes.
Yeah, I know. Hopefully we're going to be seeing each other soon. Rumor has it. Rumor has it. Now, Eric, as far as with what's going on and the governor opening things to 100%, but you still have to stay social distance and still wear a mask, how do you think the beaches and the forest and park are going to look as far as that aspect of things go?
Yeah, well, I think some of the things that were implemented this last year, I think we learned a lot from. There were things like at our beaches where they said we want to make sure that there's 15 feet between blankets
Okay.
out on the beach. And why is that? Well, we want to make sure to have 6 feet of distance in case someone's walking in between 2 blankets, and we want to have some space for them to be able to safely walk between and maintain that distance. Well, as you might imagine, not everyone knows what 15 feet is. Most people don't bring, a measuring tape with them to the beach.
Exactly.
And so there are things that can be done with, flagging and otherwise to make it more apparent and obvious for folks what appropriate distancing is. It's also difficult to require that people who might be going to the beach for a tan go for a tan while wearing a mask, right? There's something about that doesn't seem to fit.
Exactly.
So one thing that, is on my short list of things to try this year, if necessary, is to try to make it cool to have a tan on half your face. And, things like that. We'll have some fun with it. But, I think it's really a wonderful thing in Connecticut. And I hope folks are really proud of this, that, we're one of the states that chose early on that we're not going to close these places to the public. We're really just going to trust people to behave safely. And I think there's, our trust and faith in people was mostly borne out. I think people have been recreating safely in our public areas. And I do think that this year, even if we have, another spike of COVID and, or a variant or something happens, we'll know how to respond because of how we adjusted to it this last year. And I think, we're going to keep encouraging the state to remain open for people to be able to get outdoors and to do that safely. And so I think that's what's going to happen again this year.
Now, as far as once the weather gets warmer and more people are out at the beaches and out at the parks, and how do you think that's going to look?
Well, I think, it's going to look probably a lot like this last year because people are still maybe not feeling quite safe enough to travel abroad or out of state the way they, may have in the past. So that means that during the summertime, some of the folks who may have gone elsewhere are going to be here and are going to be looking for things to do. So I think it's going to be a very busy year once again for the parks. I think they'll probably do some similar things like they did at, Hammonasset and other parks this last year, such as, reducing the parking availability by about half to try to keep the crowds down a bit. There will be, and maybe because we're in a slightly better place with a bit more knowledge than where we were last year, and we have the vaccines that are, hopefully by June, July, everyone will have at least had a chance to have their first vaccination shot. Mm-hmm. You'll see things opening up more and more. So there will be a bit more capacity available in parks so that we can withstand all the people who want to get there. And, we also did find this last year, and this is something that maybe the state can adjust to, is that when the fee was no longer an issue to be paid at the gates, right, we found that people weren't staying all day at the park. It used to be, right, you pay your $13. Well, I'm going to get my money's worth. I'm staying all day. Exactly. Now, you're not paying that fee at the gate. So people will stay for a few hours and be like, hey, that was great. Had a great time. And now I'm off to have lunch somewhere or something else. So because people are coming and going a bit more frequently, that maybe our parks will be able to have extra people come because they're not staying all day. So there are a lot of things like that we're going to keep adjusting to, and I think the state is learning as we go, and we'll see. But I think it's going to be another very busy year for the parks.
Absolutely, especially once the weather gets warmer and the water temperature gets a little bit warmer, because it's probably a little too cold to go swimming right about now?
Ooh, it is. I mean, I have a little extra body fat, so I can withstand it, but I wouldn't recommend it for most people.
No, no. Now with what's going on, I'm sure you've gone out in the hiking trails or gone to a state park. What do you think?
Yeah, well, just like with the state parks being, we're expecting trails are going to continue to get record high usage. We know of a lot of, and it's interesting because one thing that we do is we work with a number of outdoor recreation retailers.
Okay.
And they reported that, whereas a lot of businesses, like restaurants, movie theaters, other gathering places had a really tough and tragic year. Outdoor recreation retailers had an amazing year. And if you think about this last year, there were times where you couldn't find a bike anywhere.
Exactly.
You couldn't find a canoe or a kayak, or think about the different types of outdoor recreation gear that just was selling off the shelves. Well, there are going to be a lot of people this year who have their, recently bought bike or canoe or kayak that they're going to want to put to use again. So, we think a lot of people are going to be getting out there again. And on the trails, you have, all the people who bought their hiking boots and, their walking sticks and, all their paraphernalia. They're going to be going out again too. I'm thoroughly convinced. And that's a great thing. It makes us feel really good because one of the things that we do as an organization is we maintain trails, right? We have amazing volunteers that we work with to maintain trails. When people are out and using those trails, it feels so good, especially when they're doing it in a courteous way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, as far as being on a trail, you obviously want to wear your mask and maintain your 6 feet.
Yeah, well, and I think one thing that I really try to do is to be respectful of those around me.
Absolutely.
And like I mentioned, people don't always know what 6 feet is, just like they don't know what 15 feet is.
Exactly.
And I bring a walking stick with me.
Okay.
Not that I use it as a weapon, but a way to just show, hey, this is about 6 feet, and and I make sure that the people that I'm walking with, if I'm walking with a group, are doing it safely. So yes,
absolutely.
We wear a mask, we stay distanced, and we always yield the path when others are coming down the trails toward us, so that we can keep that distance. Of course, we're also, being courteous with if we bring anything in, we take it out with us, et cetera, et cetera, leave no trace. I'm definitely seeing that ethic is starting to catch on, and we hope as people get out this year, they're really going to enjoy it and not be frustrated when someone's a bad actor, but people are doing it safely.
Absolutely. So we got a little bit more time left. What else do you want to tell people about the CFPA and what you guys do?
Well, I would just say that, if you're looking for a cool place to volunteer, to help out, in particular, either working on trails, or if you're interested in getting involved as an advocate, contacting legislators about various pieces of legislation that affect, forests, trails, parks, and the outdoors, get involved with CFPA. Go to our website, which is ctwoodlands.org.
Okay.
Think about joining the organization. We certainly depend on support from individuals. We do get some grants, but it's mostly individuals that support our organization. So get involved. And I'm always looking to hear from folks. So if you have any questions, feel free to, look me up, contact me personally. And I would just say, I want to recognize one person who has been a terrific volunteer for CFPA, not on the trails, but on the communications front. And that's some guy by the name of Pete Mezzetti, who
Never heard of him.
Has been a terrific supporter, and we really appreciate you, Pete, for all you do.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks a lot. Eric Hammerling, we're out of time, so I want to thank you for coming down. Hopefully we'll see you again soon.
Pleasure. Look forward to it.
You got it. On behalf of Eric Hammerling, I'm Pete Mezzetti. Thanks. Good night, and we'll see you next time.